Hi, everyone. I want to talk to you about a reality that we see in the Bible that I think people are experiencing these days as we're shut in, we're isolated, home alone, uh, listening to the news, which doesn't make things look very hopeful. Um, it's a funny thing how what we think on can affect our feelings and can affect us spiritually. That's why Paul said, think on these things in Philippians 4:8 and gave us a list of positive things to think on. They're the very things that God thinks on. He wouldn't ask us to do it unless he thinks on those things himself. But there's an old story, it's a Quaker story, about a man who was called before the king as a census taker. And the king said, I want you to go and I want you to count all the flowers in my kingdom. He said, yes, sir. And he marched off with his clipboard under his arm and began to count all the flowers in his kingdom. The king got thinking about it. He thought, well, that information is not much good to me unless I can compare it with something. So he said, I wonder how many weeds I have in my kingdom. So he called in another census taker and said, go count all the weeds in my kingdom. And he said, yes, sir, and put the clipboard under his arm and marched out. A little while later, that second census taker came stomping back into the throne room and threw down his clipboard quite loudly. He said, King, this is the worst kingdom in the world. It's overrun with weeds. Everywhere I look, it's nothing but weeds. I want out. I want to move my family. We're not going to live here any longer. This has got to be the worst kingdom anywhere. It's just weeds everywhere. And so he stormed off. The first census taker, he come floating in, wreathed in smiles, and very softly said, King, this is the most beautiful kingdom in all the world. I never want to leave here. There's just flowers everywhere. I've just spent the day looking in the faces of flowers. And the moral of the story is that whatever you're looking at will affect you. It'll affect your mood. It'll affect your life spiritually. The direction of your eyes, the eyes of your heart, very, very important during this time. I was reading a story about Ernest Shackleton. He's down in Antarctica with 27 other men. Their ship was crushed in the ice. They lost it. They were on an ice floe for the most part of 2 years. They're in isolation. They're in cold, extreme weather. Doesn't look like there's any prospect of getting out. But Shackleton was an amazing leader. And one of the things he would do is he'd try to keep the morale of the men up. And he would even isolate the ones who were too pessimistic, too negative, critical, complaining. He'd isolate them from other people on the team so that their morale would not go down the tubes. And he'd take that person and make him bunk with him in his tent. And he'd try to keep his spirits up. There was a period of time where they left quite a bit of the crew on this place called Elephant Island. And they had to cross over to get to a whaling station. And while they're there, and they're in these huts made out of upside down boats and covered with tarps, and they're closed in, they're sequestered in. They can't really go anywhere. It's too cold outside. They go out for the odd penguin kill. They're eating hoosh and penguin and powdered milk, and they're living on this, and it's a really tough time. One of the ways they got through it is they projected ahead with the eyes of their heart positively. And they'd say, what are you going to do when you get out? What are you going to do when you get off this island? And they would describe what they had for vision, what they had for desire. And they'd say things like, what are you going to eat? And you would think it would be torture when you're eating powdered milk and your rations are dwindling day by day, that it'd be torture to talk about steaks and eggs and certain desserts, what's your favorite dessert? But they did that all the time. And it sustained them. And it wasn't torture. And it's not escapism. It's envisioning in a positive way a pleasant thing that you're going to do when you get out of here. And of course they did. When they did get rescued, a ship came and picked them up, took them back to Punta Arenas, Chile. And some of them, they ate a lot of the things that they described. They would eat whole sticks of butter. Just everything that they're deprived on the island, they just wanted to eat. But it's a powerful story in that I think God wants us, and we're encouraged to look at something in the future in a positive light. What are you going to do when you get out of this thing? What are you going to do when we get out of this time, this crisis that we're in? There's life beyond this. There's life beyond this. You need to tell yourself that. This is not it. There's life beyond this. What are you going to do? What's your goal? How are you going to redeem this? How is this going to be useful for you? What can you do now that would get you ready for the release that we're all going to experience? Where are you going to eat? What restaurants? What kind of vacation? What would be a dream trip for you? What would you like to do if you could just have the freedom to go and do anything you'd want to do? I think there are things that we're allowed to do. We're allowed to envision that. Trust in the Lord that He'll bring it to pass. Hope this little lesson is helpful.